You know who refused to flee? Followers of Jesus. Even those that had the means to stay refused to take advantage of their means and leave. And the reason they did not leave is that their hearts were absolutely battered by the plight of the people left behind. And they said, if it means our own life, we will stay. And we will love those people. Is it any wonder that a century later, the same empire embraced Christianity as their national religion? They were emotionally affected. And so must we be today. Nehemiah says, look, here's how the passion deals work. When something moves you, when something hits you, when something stirs you, don't go, oh, that's too bad, and walk away. Nurture it. Feed it. And see what God does. Here's the second thing I think we can learn from Nehemiah, and that is we need to identify what we want. I think it's fascinating. After a time of praying and thinking and nurturing what moved him and it was growing in his heart, we find this in Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. Nehemiah says, the king said to me, what is it you want? That's a great question. I wonder if God were to come to us today and ask us that question, if we even have an answer. What do you want? Here's Nehemiah's response. He says, then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. By the way, this had to be a really quick prayer. What do you want? I prayed to the God of heaven, answer the king. I was willing to internal, oh God, help me right now. And I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it. I know exactly what I want. I want to go back to Jerusalem, and I want to rebuild the wall. Not only did he know exactly what he wanted, he had a plan. Look what it goes on to say in verses 7 and 8. I also said to the king, if it please the king, may I also have letters of the governors, so that they will provide safe conduct for me on the way to Judah. And can I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates and the citadel, so that I can get everything rebuilt. I mean, look, I already know who I need to contact. I already need to know what I would do. I got a plan. Isn't it fascinating? He came to a place after being moved so deeply and nurturing that, he said, okay, I have identified clearly, this is what I want, and there's a basic plan of how to get it done. I'm just wondering how often we can feel stirred by something, moved by something, and yet we never get to the place where we just say, okay, look, this is what I want with my life. Write it down, articulate it, tell everybody, this is what I want, and here's my basic plan for getting there. Most of us approach this idea of what we want spiritually for God, what we want our lives to mean for Him, that one area we should really be throwing ourselves into. We approach it like I do 95% of the time when I go to my refrigerator. I have a vague sense of hungriness. I know I kind of want something to eat, but I have absolutely no idea what I want. And I open the refrigerator, and you don't do this, do you? I open the refrigerator like, I know I want to eat something, and I'll root around, and then I'll look in the freezer, and I'll root around, and I'm not, the vast majority, I just shut the door and walk away, I want something, but I don't know. And do you know what I do 5 minutes later? I go back to the refrigerator, and I open it up again. It's like somehow something materialized in there while I was gone. It's like I know what I want, but I really don't. I kind of want something. And that's almost how many of us are when it comes to what are we going to do for God. It's kind of like, well, I kind of want to do something with orphans. What? I don't know. At some point, we've got to take that thing growing in us and say, okay, I'm just going to label it. This is what I want to do with my life. And this is a basic plan on how to get there. You have that? And then I think we learn one final thing from Nehemiah about this whole deal. Act. See, it goes on to say in chapter 2 of the book of Nehemiah, it says in verse 9, so I went to the governor and got the stuff I needed. And in verse 11, so I went to Jerusalem in order to rebuild the walls. In other words, you know what, I prayed, I've nurtured it. Yeah, you know what, I know what I want, I got a basic plan. And now I'm just going to get up and I'm going to act. I'm going to do something about it. Nehemiah had many unknowns. He had many skills he would need to have that he did not yet possess. Opposition had already begun to grow in the form of two military leaders called Sanballat and Tobiah. But in spite of the fact that there were many unknowns, he had a lot to learn, he was inexperienced, and opposition was growing, he said, I'm going to act. And so must we. Christianity is about action. You know, it's not like someday when we finally get to heaven, Jesus is going to look at us on Judgment Day and go, well believed, my good and faithful servant. Well believed. You got the doctrine right. That's what I wanted. Well done. No, he's going to say, well, what? Done. It's what you've done. It's what you do. Places like James chapter 2 make it so clear. Faith without works is dead. It's not faith at all. The whole purpose of faith, the whole purpose of knowing things is to be the fuel and the direction to act in our world. One of the things that set Connection Church apart from many other churches is we aren't about knowing, we're about doing. And knowing helps us do, but knowing is not an end in itself. Did you know that there's not one message I bring where the goal is that you might know something? Zero. My goal is that when we get done, we can go out there and we can do something. That we can act in our world as ambassadors of Jesus that actually change things for all time and eternity. Christianity is about action. It's about doing things in our world. And get this, when people who have nurtured what moves them so it's grown into a raging passion under the leadership of God, who have taken the time to identify, you know what, this is just what I want to do with my life. And here's a basic plan to go there. And people who, in spite of the fact that there's many unknowns and there's skills they don't yet have and their things are probably not ready for and opposition aren't going to come, they get up and go, I'm going to act. When they do that, power is released. The power of Almighty God, power that blesses, power that changes the world. Many, many years ago, Agnes Bawaju, as a little teenage girl, just felt called to ministry. And so when she got a little older, she trained in Ireland and India, and she began doing some things for God. And at one point, she went to her superiors because she had a dream. And Agnes went up to them and said, I have a dream to build an orphanage for children. And I have 3 pennies to my name. And her superiors looked at her and said, with 3 pennies, you can't do anything. And she looked at them and said, with 3 pennies and a dream and God, I can do anything. Flash forward almost 50 years, the year is 1979. The Nobel Prize is being handed out and is given to Agnes Bawaju. We know her as Mother Teresa, who spent over 50 years ministering in the slums of Calcutta, making an unbelievable difference. She won that award as the world recognized how transformational an agent she had become. And people have come up to her or came up to her before her passing and said, what can we do to make a difference with our lives with you, like you have with yours? And you know what her advice always was? It was the same advice every time. Here she would say, find your own Calcutta.